All right, I've got to tell you that today is a really fascinating episode. So many times when I record with fascinating people, I wish I had left the recorder run longer. This today is Dez Rock, and Dez has been a hacker for most of her career. And now she's become a white hat. She is out helping companies understand the threat risks and assessments to them. And she's helping them close all the loopholes and doors that hackers would use to get inside their systems. She's got extensive experience in this industry, but she also truly understands how AI is going to affect it as well. I'm really fascinated by this episode. As I said, I wish I had let the recorder run longer. She and I recorded for about 45 minutes. And then as we were wrapping, we went down the rabbit hole for 45 minutes. I didn't catch most of that on video, but there's so many good things in here that allude to that. Dez is coming back because we are going to continue that conversation and get into the philosophical ethics of AI, cybersecurity, hackers, and all of the above. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did getting to know Dez, and I'm really looking forward to having her back in the near future. Here we go. Welcome back to another edition of the Convergence. Today, I have Dez Rock with me from SIEMonster, and we have been having a great conversation already about cybersecurity and the things that are happening and ethics and philosophy. This has been a lot of fun so far. Dez, welcome, and thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on the show.
Tell me a little bit about SIEMonster and where the concept came from and the origin story of the organization.
Like every great story, it has to have a very good and in-depth origin story that has a little bit of mystery to it. Ours started when we were, prior to becoming software security providers, we were pen testers. Prior to that, we were actually professional hackers, arguably the same thing. So we were definitely red team and auditing banks, governments, organizations all around the world, and did that for over 20 years. The pivot to security solutions came from one of our clients who asked for protection. And because an audit or penetration test is basically an audit on the spot audit, and it tells you your weaknesses, but it doesn't necessarily proactively protect. So we looked around, and this was going back in 2016. And there was not that many solutions on the market. There was Splunk, which I'm sure everybody has heard of when it comes to securing data. And Splunk has always been cost prohibitive, so there is a barrier to entry there. And we started out with open source software that we put together and put in front of customers that the tech world absolutely loved, and moved on from there and went through Techstars, and here we are. The difference with us is that we started out wanting to democratize cybersecurity, so to make it accessible for all. And we did not want to compromise our 20 years of background, which is penetration testing, hackers. We didn't want to sell a solution that was just a tick box solution to get you through compliance. We wanted to sell a solution that could absolutely save you from ransomware attacks and keep your data safe in its entirety. Yeah.
That's great. And it's a big deal because if you've never went through this, I've gone through this with two different organizations. My last company, Fat Scooters, we dealt with cyber attacks every single day, particularly after our television show went out. We went from 100 attacks a day to 10 times that a day, just solely because our profile was much higher. I tell the story. I lost a company to a cyber attack back in 2017. I was an investor in a company, and we had a very good algorithmic technology that was tied into a piece of hardware. We were in production. And we had an engineer who, unbeknownst to us, had the only copy of the firmware and software on his computer. And along with some other companies' very important data. And he got hacked, and they held him for ransom, and he couldn't afford the ransom and didn't let us know until it was too late. And at that point, everything was gone. And it's a big deal. I don't think people, unless you've experienced it.
It is a big deal. And I suppose that's it. What you're touching on right there, the factor, which if I could be so generous and label it under almost like shame, he held back in the position he was. So therefore, it made your company even more vulnerable because of that, without the disclosure. And that is a really big, important part of cybersecurity and why it is in the situation it is right now, because people will not talk about the failings and share them. I'll give you an example. You Google right now companies that have been held to ransomware, or companies that have had data breaches, or whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So it will only be the people and I can tell you this for free, that the people you will read about are the people who are forced to admit that something has happened, that there has been many, many of times where a company will hide the fact that they've had a breach because they can, because nobody wants their image to be one of, lack of trust about their image. So that's the first thing. Nobody will actually discuss breaches. Second thing is, each one of those companies, and I keep reminding people, each one of these companies that have been breached, you're talking about 2016, way back in the early days when I said there wasn't that many. But right now in today's market, I mean, Uber got done over 3 times. They are using a solution, I can guarantee you, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are using a solution. Why isn't it working? Why aren't we talking about it? Why aren't we discussing what they're using and why is it going wrong? Is it the solution? Is it the software? Is it the monitoring? Is it the offshore monitoring? Like, what is it that is not working? Until we can actually get honest answers with that, it's very difficult to move forward in this industry when we're more prevalent to hiding our breaches and hiding our vulnerabilities. It doesn't make the collective enterprise a more secure place, because nobody wants to share what they're doing right or wrong.
I totally agree with you. And I think the audience of this show all said the same thing at the same time whenever you mentioned that, and that is Sarbanes-Oxley. And that is the companies that are reporting it are the publicly traded companies where the executives can go to prison if they don't disclose it. So they don't want to disclose it.
That's correct.
It's solely because the SEC will throw them in jail if they don't disclose it.
We already have incidences of companies that they are doing prison time because of exactly this too. So what is happening is, so here's the tail wagging the dog, as they say, right? So cybersecurity is only being taken seriously when there's when there are outcomes to not taking it seriously. So we touched on ethics before before we hit record, and that talks about the ethics of a company that won't take a customer or somebody's data seriously until they have their feet to the fire. Does that make sense? Or unless it hurts their bottom dollar.
Yeah, right? And I think there's an American mentality, and I talk a lot about this in the consulting work I do. And anybody on here who's a customer has heard any of my other shows know that I religiously believe this theory, and that is that in Japan, one of the first rules that they teach you in management is that employees cannot make mistakes. If a mistake has occurred, it is always the result of a system or process my manager has implemented incorrectly. And I tell CEOs this all the time. I know that stings our Western mentality, but if you assume that, if you make a culture in your organization and you say to your people, you can't break anything. If you do it, it's always my fault. Then when something does happen, they immediately raise their hand because they get to point at you and say, see what you did? See what I broke and what you did? And that's a philosophy that I think, if we just embedded it in our mindset. I say this about Sam Walton years ago. I did a little bit of consulting work for Walmart. And there's an old story that says Sam Walton used to say, if you have a problem on aisle 4 today, you have an employee problem. If you have a problem on aisle 4 tomorrow, you have a management problem. If the problem exists next week, go into the restroom, look into the mirror and say, I'm the effing problem. So it is a cultural thing. And in the world that we live in today, where threats are real and can be realized at any moment, the best approach is to create a culture where people are willing to raise their hand the second that it happens and say, something ain't right. My wife worked for a big Silicon Valley company for many years. 2 or 3 times she got phished. And every time their culture is, you can get a reward and a bonus if you get phished. Right? They're like, please let us know if you've been phished because we'd love to figure it out. And because of that mentality, of, hey, if we have the smartest people in the world, if you get tricked, let us know, because we all would have been tricked. That changes things. It changes the dynamic of how people think about threats.
Mm. Exactly. So we still, however, those are great examples, but we still live in a world where majority of the time, if there is a breach, the CISO gets the ass, or the CISO, as you guys call it here, that he get, that they're the ones whose neck is on the chopping block, right? Yeah. I can tell you of our previous, professional pen testing days of boards asking for us for a more altered, board friendly report of the situation going on. So this is a topic that is, this isn't just lip service, I'm guessing, or this is a topic that we have experience on. So when we talk about the bigger issues in cybersecurity, basically, I'm going to make some generalization and cause some thunder. Ready? Basically, decisions are being made by people who are not technically savvy enough to make them for their organization, being made by so they will literally Google, go to Reddit, do whatever to see what is everyone else using. Well-known fact that no one loses their job by implementing a Gartner Quadrant product, right? Mm. So if you do one of those, if you do that, then you are safe. It's almost like a politician. His number one job is to keep his job, right? Not necessarily to serve. So that is the mentality in which we're breeding in that case. There is a disjointness between, I think I was reading an article actually where security, CISOs are not necessarily on the board or represented on the board as well as much as they should be. It really is a disjointment that starts there. And like I said, it's their fault if anything goes wrong. Now, I'm telling you that his number one objective, or hers number one objective, is to keep his or her job. I, again, have war stories where someone has disclosed and they have lost their job. No breach, no nothing, just literally disclosed they had a vulnerability and they lost their job because of that. So, by the way, that company then years later went on to have the most enormous breach.
Sure.
Which and I'm very well versed into that, but the most enormous breach known that is, traveled the world, right? Yeah. And that's what we're fighting against. That's number one problem right there. And secondly, like I said, the barrier to entry, like securing your data. People will only open up budgets. And by the way, if you can open up your budget, we'll only open up budgets when and if they have to.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I like to give the house analogy. You build a house. Maybe ostensibly, I'm trying to think of a time maybe we didn't even put locks on the door, right? It was such a safe neighborhood. Yeah. Nowadays, we don't think of that. In fact, you might even have a monitoring service and all that sort of stuff. Well, it's very much the same. In fact, now we would even architect homes with security in mind, or neighborhoods with security in mind. Maybe for established companies that have been there for eons, it's very difficult to redo that. So it's an add-on, and that can often get clunky. But it's also almost always an afterthought, and only if you are forced to. Yeah. Now that's incredible in this day and age, on why we would leave our doors open to attacks. Or what's more infuriating is we put a big lock on the door, really big one on the front door, but we this is the analogy I'm going with. We refuse to lock all of the side doors, the side gate, all that, from the back. And like I said, we used to be professional hackers. This is why we refuse to do that in our product, because we know that the front door, the lock, that's going to make your board really happy. That's going to make your CISO really happy. What it will also make very happy is all the hackers out there who know exactly that they were never going to go in through the front.
Yeah. No, it's such a great point. And I think it's part of, and I was going to ask you if there's any difference between different cultures and philosophies. I talk a lot about this in the US. Yeah. You mentioned outcomes really early on, and there's only 4 parts of a process: inputs, throughputs, outputs, and outcomes. American boards focus on inputs and outputs. That's it. I don't care how the sausage is made, and I really don't care what happens after the fact. I'm not thinking about the risk mitigation thing. And I address this with boards all the time, where I sit down and I say, can you give me a list of the defensive players on your team? Who is here to defend the profit margin? Who is here to make sure that when $100 comes in, that we're trying to capture 18 on the bottom, but who's here to try to see if we can get 20? Name your defensive players. And you'd be shocked how many companies, even in the 500, 1,000, 1,500 employees, look at me like I have three heads. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, you're talking about like our CTO? I'm like, so your CTO full-time job is only to protect you from cyber attacks? And they're like, no. So it's interesting that even though we love sports analogies here in the US, we only care about the offensive sports analogies of catching the touchdown,
the next score,
and going, and then we don't think about, did we actually do the right thing here, and how did we get there? I think that's the difference between professional athletes and amateur athletes. Amateur athletes want to win the game. Professional athletes are trying to figure out statistically, percentages, and trying to think about nutrition and all these other things.
Or a good coach will play that,
or a good coach. Yeah. So is that just an American Western philosophy where we don't defend the castle, or is it just a nature of capitalism?
So a little from column A and a little from column B, but I don't see any other country doing it right at the minute. I think that I think there's a lot of catch up to be had. I also think that this is sort of like the other industries I talk about, right, and compare them to is like, say, for example, financing and legal. And I say these because these are quantifiable areas within a company that are settled, they are established. We all know the hierarchy, we all know the needs. Now, can you imagine your financial team being loosey-goosey with your numbers? You just would never allow it, right? Not only that, your financial team has to be regulated outside of your organization. They need to have qualifications, regulations, and meet certain conditions, correct? Yes. Same with your legal team. You can't just have Joe Blogs from down the road giving you legal advice, correct? Yes. Not in cyber. So when it comes to, like you said, protecting your organization, there is no regulations around that. There is no laws around that. We're still playing catch up with that. We're still playing catch up with privacy laws. So we are in uncharted territory, and the speed in which we are moving with cybersecurity is outranking the speed in which laws, regulations are being created. They are often an afterthought once the damage is done, and seen over and over and over again, to when finally people say, maybe we should do something about this. So that's one way to approach it for sure. But if you wanted to go on the front foot, then the advice would be from someone who's been seeing this and the vulnerabilities, and not what you see on the news, but literally what's
actually happening.
Exactly. is to say that unless you are protecting your asset, and your asset is your organization, right? Unless you are protecting it, then just using it to make money is not enough. Like that is fantastic. But if there is if there is defensive or attacking damage done to your company, that's going to affect your bottom line. You're not thinking of that because you've never asked to think of that, especially if you're a long-time player. You've never thought of that. So this is something that I would urge people to be proactive about. Now, that comes down to where are you getting the information from, which is what I touched on before. And I said that there is a lot of opportunistic people out there who will sell you a solution with bells and whistles and tell you this is it. The questions I would ask if you're thinking about this is, does it cover every single part of my organization? Do I have blind spots? Do I have endpoints that are not looked after? Am I just looking after cloud? Am I just looking after on-prem? This is what they sell you, by the way. And what is their pricing model? Is it for ingestion rates, right? Which means that you're being charged by ingestion rates, which is what they all do, which means this is why it becomes prohibitive, because they'll say, no, we can monitor everything. And then they'll put a price in front of you. You'll die. And then you'll say, wait, maybe we'll just monitor what's really important. And here's where you play roulette with your organization. Yeah. Okay. So my question is, and this is from professional hackers, you're hearing it from me. If you want to protect your entire organization, encircle your entire organization. No ifs, no buts. Do not make any excuses for that. Your entire organization needs to be encompassed. I'm telling you right now, most large organizations do not do that one simple golden rule.
It's incredible. And I think what you're talking about is something I've been thinking a lot about lately from a philosophical perspective of the difference between passive and active ignorance, right? It's one thing to be passive in your ignorance and to not know the threat that's out there. But it's a very different thing to be active in that ignorance and know that the threat is there and refuse to accept that it is there and refuse to investigate it, because investigating it, is going to make you face reality. I think so many of us do it with the scale, right? It's like we all have a scale in our bathroom. How often do we really weigh ourselves is a very different question, because when we are faced with the reality of the results, and we understand what that means, then to continue on in that direction means we have to be actively ignorant. We have to actively turn our face away from it every single day and say, I'll do it another time. And I think that's a lot of the challenge. I think we aren't passively ignorant on cybersecurity. I think we're actively ignorant, because you can't watch the news and not know that they're coming after you.
But them, not me, right?
Well,
But
right,
them, not
exactly.
me.
It's them.
And
No,
so
I feel
it's
bad
that.
for them.
But also, like it goes back to the culture. You will then say you have the sweats, you're a CEO of a large organization, you're sweating just listening to this. First thing you're going to do is talk to your CTO or your CISO and all that sort of stuff and say, hey, listen, what is our security posture? Because, listen, I'm concerned. What on earth do you think you're going to hear?
Everything's great. I've been taking care of it. It's all
Exactly.
good. I
Exactly.
logged in yesterday
Do
and
you
we look
honestly
fine.
think that you're going to hear, listen, we could do better? Do you really think you're ever going to hear that? You're going to hear, look, I don't know what you heard, but we are fantastic. We are. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've had that level of confidence from companies that we've been. By the way, let me just tell you one thing. When we were professional hackers and doing some pen testing for any company, and all the big auditors were our competitors, we would often ask them, I know you've had X, Y, Z, I don't want to name them, to audit your company, but we'll come in and do it for free. Mm-hmm. You can pay us only if we get in, right?
Yeah.
And we've never, ever lost that challenge. And you know why? Because we were not a 9-to-5 organization that were logging on, logging off, and doing the bare minimum. We used social engineering. We studied our target. We emulated exactly, wonder why. We emulated exactly what a hacker would do. That is working weekends, that is doing a triangulation, a tiger team, like literally everything they would do. Your auditing team, the one is not doing that. Not doing that. So if that's the case, then the team that's providing you with the solution to protect against that is also not aware of the way in which hackers actually operate. Does that make sense?
It so does, and it reminds me of an analogy I love to tell when it comes to consulting work, which is, I own a couple of consulting businesses, and I tell CEOs this all the time. I say, look, you are capable of cutting your own hair. You have a mirror in your home. You have a pair of scissors. You probably have the other mirror that you can do the back thing, right? But just thinking about it makes you realize I cannot obtain any sort of perspective that's going to allow me, other than cutting it all off. That's the only way I can do it myself. But I can't obtain a perspective that allows me to be an expert in this situation. I can't look through these eyes and see a reflection in a mirror and understand what's going on. All I can see is this. I have to have somebody else outside of me that isn't me, that is looking at it from a completely different perspective, that can look at me and say, yeah, that looks terrible. The comb over is not working anymore, right? They're the only ones that can do that. You can't do it for yourself. And I think that's a really interesting point. Particularly, one of the things I love about being on the outside of companies is that I can tell them the truth. And, they fire me. That's fine. I got 10 other customers. I got a waiting list. I'm okay. Right. But if I'm the CTO and I lose my job, then I got to go find another career and I'm lacking my income for a while. So we can give an objective opinion that nobody else can inside of a company.
That's true. But if you're relying on the CTO for security, there's a problem. There's your number one flag. Secondly,
Why do you say that? Let me just ask that question, because I think a lot of people just went, wait, what? Like they just snapped their head and said, why? Because I do.
Yeah, because
so
CTO, what does CTO stand for?
Chief Technology Officer.
Right. Technology, which means what? Let's break that down to its infancy.
That's a great question. It probably means my coders. This is probably why we see more CIOs, which is more around infrastructure and
But
but
still,
still there's no
so
chief security officer anywhere,
correct.
right?
In any
Unless
of
you're a
that,
bank.
so in any of that, your CTO is in charge of your network of your organization in its technology capacity, correct? So that's not the CTO is not the it's the person in charge of, and it has always been, your network.
Yeah.
The person in charge of your network has no experience or expertise in the security of that network. It is like asking an architect to then provide security in that building in which they've built. They've not discussed, they've not thought of that. They've talked about efficiency, they've talked about productivity, they've talked about everything else. There is no security in that process, in that design. That is why we have Chief Information Security Officers, CISOs, right? Because their role is and by the way, they're probably further down in the totem pole of C-level executives, but to be honest, everything should run through them. Everything. You think about this. Legal should run through them because the way legal is communicating, if you're doing sensitive documents from one or the other, how are you transporting that? How are you transposing that? How are you sending that? Is it just email attachments? Security should know about that. Your financials, where is that being held? Is it sensitive information? Security should know about that, right? There isn't an area of your organization, if you do not want it out there for everybody to know about, they should know. They should be across that. So when we're talking about, the way I see it, if I was to draw a picture, the CTO draws the whole organization. The CISO's role is to come on and look at that and then go right around that entirety.
Build the moat, right? Yeah,
correct.
That's great.
Build the moat and say every single thing we do. Now, if you're a very good CISO, then you will think outside of information technology as well, not just computer-based.
That's right.
You will discuss other human behavior as well of what would happen that would cause vulnerabilities within your company. For example, if there, and we can talk about that too, but that's advanced level. But for starters, yes. So relying on a CTO is maybe not the.
I love that because I worked with a big Fortune 1000 company years ago that actually had a major security breach, and it turned out the security breach came because they had a freezer that was on the fritz, and they put an IoT temperature sensor in the freezer that Bluetooth connected to the store manager, so he could keep an eye on it just in case anything happened and they could react. But they needed to connect it to the internet. So simply they connected it to the internet. It had a Bluetooth signal, right? And very quickly somebody figured out how to exploit the entire system.
And bring the whole
they just couldn't figure it out. They're sitting there.
It's Achilles' heel, right?
Yeah.
Achilles' heel. So you've got a warrior that never loses a fight and one freaking little hill and brings the whole thing down. Or the analogy of the Great Wall of China, right? They built a wall to keep the Mongols out. How'd the Mongols get in? They bribed the guard at the door. It's a human failure that did it, right? Actually, I'm not sure if that story is true, but I tell it because it feels true, and it's a really good analogy.
Well, stories don't always have to be true. Let's be honest. Particularly, if you think about all the great storytellers, they elaborate.
Correct. But the analogy is there.
The analogy is what we're looking for.
You cannot get a horde of people over that wall. The best and easiest way is to get through the front door.
That's why the reason the word Trojan horse is used so often in cybersecurity.
Well,
right?
absolutely.
Who knows how true the story really is, but it is a very interesting. It's a concept of human evolution.
And I suppose like going philosophical with this, attacking civilizations, is no different to what cybersecurity is all about. By the way, so this isn't. If you're thinking about, we never used to deal with it, we did. It just looked different. Just looked different. So now we're dealing with it on the internet. And here we have armies, standing armies, navies, marines. Well, we have categorized these things. Yet we have one CTO, which you've mentioned, who's supposed to be your army. Like, when does that happen? When?
Such a good point. And listen, so many companies, I don't think I think the dirty little secret inside organizations, and I'm going to say up to maybe $1 billion, maybe a couple $1 billion,
Right.
is that they likely don't have a single source of truth. They likely don't have structured data. They
That's
likely
right.
grew quickly over the course of 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
They have a lot of duct tape, and
That's right.
they have stock in bubble yum because everything is piecemealed together. And I see this all the time. I see this with
Yes.
wildly successful companies with 12, 15% EBITDA that we get in. We're like, we need to do a systems diagram. Do you have one? And they're like, well, we use this system. And then we find that there's 65 other charges on the credit cards for other little systems that they're using. And a lot of times you mentioned about, where's your data at? We worked with a financial services company a few years back where they had a very secure CRM system that generated their reports. But in doing a throughput analysis where we literally sat for hours with stopwatches watching the work people were doing, we found they also were required to put all their information into 13 other Excel spreadsheets. Some were hosted on Google Drive, some were on OneDrive, some were on Office 365. And it's like the same data is in 13 other places. Are you protecting all 14 spots? You're paying a premium for one, and you put it everywhere else.
Exactly. And I suppose that's exactly what we thought of as well, which is why we made sure we ingested from every area as well. Do you know what I mean? That's what I mean when I say we encompass the whole entire organization.
I just heard of a company I heard of a company recently that said they needed to move to a more secure system for password sharing because they were concerned somebody would get into the Google Drive sheet that they had shared with all employees that had every password for the payroll system. And I'm thinking to myself, holy smokes.
That's generally not the way password software works. Usually you're creating vaults where authorized people on different levels have access to those particular vaults and can be shared with those passwords. That's how that works. And I'm all for that. That's better than the sticky note on the monitor,
Drive,
right?
Right. And I think that's why they were looking for a solution, is because they realized this makes us very, very vulnerable. And listen, I run mostly small businesses. I mean, my Amex card, everybody has my Amex card. Everybody's got a picture of it someplace, in their phone. At least they used to many years ago. Anymore, I'm a lot more careful with that. But for years, the business ran on my credit card. So when the business runs on your credit card as the CEO, and the argument is always, well, I want to get all the miles. Well, then that means that 12 people have your credit card. And are you really sure they're all taking care of this appropriately? Probably not.
That's the human element right there. So you're talking about, and this is what I mean about your security posture should include more than just your IT infrastructure.
It has to. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the future here, because obviously you've been doing this for more than a few months, right? You've been in this game for years, and you have a deeper understanding of it. How does, let's just say, AI change that landscape? Does that take this to another level? Because now it's not just one brain thinking, it's hundreds of billions of brains that potentially could be working against you.
So AI, and it's coming fast, and we're working with it as well. So AI will help in this field. By the way, everything I say the equal and opposites can be said about the people who are going to use it against you. So it can be used to create cross vectors. So AI will understand patterns that are happening that are unusual and act within your organization. Therefore, in a security presence is what I'm talking about. So therefore, take out the human element that they didn't see an alert, that they didn't act fast enough. And so that is fantastic, that proactivity. You would need to train your system so it stops giving you false positives, right? And you'd customize it. But that would be it. And when I say it would populate, and we already do this, by the way. So when we have an incident, everything is an everything is an event, right? So you turn on your printer, that's an event. You swipe with your card to get into the building, that's an event. Things become an incident when it's an issue, right? So an incident will be flagged if, for example, your username is being, someone with your credentials is being logged in a country in which you're not, because you were in a different country 2 hours ago. So that's an incident that is then often populated and flagged and then quarantined to say this guy didn't like just the knowledge that this person did
Sure.
not travel all the way over here. This is a basic level example. There are also organizations which give known threat intelligence, IP ranges and all sorts of stuff that will populate within that too. So if that's flagged in your organization, that will also be raised. So these are things that are already happening in the cybersecurity space or in the SIEM space anyway. And if they're not with your provider, another reason to go check. But the next level would be the automation, and that would allow for, instead of the human required, it is about removing jobs, unfortunately, but the human required to look after that system, to monitor that system, to have that automated to say, well, these are the things that usually happen most of the time, right? And so we want to automate this to make sure the system runs on itself and knows itself. Now, I say all of this with a caveat because everyone thinks that they're the only ones on the streets buying the biggest weapon, right?
Yeah.
So if AI is out there for the good guys, it's also out there for the bad guys.
Yeah.
And
they're not working 9 to 5 to your point. they don't have to deal with PTO and and sick time and all of those kind of things. So they are much less regulated, and even to the word I like to use this word anymore, domesticated, right? They have not had to fall inside the parameters of the system.
No,
they can work.
They don't care about ethics. They're not interested in ethics or morality or whether it's illegally, they can actually do this or not. They're thieves. They're coming in to steal your data to hold you ransom or ruin you. It could literally, this could be a competitor. This has happened since Adam was a boy. Someone coming in as a competitor to steal your IP. Come on, you cannot tell me that stuff hasn't been happening. Of course it has been. So you have no idea.
Steve Jobs stole Adam's idea, right? The Apple thing. I mean, it's like it is really true.
What's
though.
Worse is I'm going to steal that joke.
Yeah, please do it. Right. I mean, as soon as Eve was done, Eve took her bite, Adam took his bite, and Steve Jobs took it from there.
Yoink.
But it is really true, and I think you're right in the sense that we've got to be aware of this. And I think the difference that AI can provide. I just did a speech last week to the FEI, which is a big CFO group here in the States. And one of the things that we talked about was this exact thing. It is that AI can see patterns that we can't see. And we talked about, I don't know if you saw in the news, and it was actually mentioned in an SEC hearing the other day, there's a Chinese lending platform that turned an AI on to all of their data for hundreds of millions of micro loans. And they determined there were some factors that determined the probability of payback very, very accurately. And you would think that would be credit score, that would be time at job, time at residence. No, it was how quickly they answered the questions on the phone and what the charge on their phone was at the time that they completed the application and what has been the pattern of that phone being charged over time. They found those were accurate depictions of successful, credit worthiness. And they actually have a lower rate of default than their competitors. And the question has been asked, why? And nobody's really sure why, other than to think that maybe if I charge my phone regularly, maybe that means I have a regular place to sleep at night. Maybe it means I have access to electricity on a regular basis. If you're thinking about in a society like China that isn't as westernized, but what are the reasons? And the reality is, does it really matter the reasons if the data is accurate and is able to quantify it properly?
But you're also pointing out factors.
Yes.
That are all your theories are factors that would make sense in a country where electricity is not. Do you know what I mean? That would all make sense there. So you cannot apply those rules and say, "Oh, this is a fantastic product. Let's apply it across the world," because it will not hold up. I'm not sure if what if the vectors in which you're describing are exactly why, but they will not hold up in other areas. So that's why you've got to be careful with out-of-the-box AI and to see whether, it's not a one-stop solution. Remember, you have to teach it what you want it to learn as well, right? So, with cybersecurity, the biggest issue is that, nobody wants false positives. Nobody wants work productivity interrupted constantly with change your password or do this or do that. Like that's an interruption, right? At the same time, nobody wants a laxed position as well. So we are very much in this watch this space category of how exactly, and I don't mean that in cybersecurity, how exactly AI will benefit our lives. And the one factor, it's really interesting because we've been in the world where social media has been intricately involved in our lives now for a while. But yet, the phenomenon we all feel is that we are less connected. We are more alone. We all feel more alone, right? So there is almost a push, and there always has been a pushback on we need to get off these devices, we need to control it, we need to do this. So the one thing that we are not looking at is in our ever ready to say, oh, how's this going to make my life better? Because we all thought Facebook was going to all change our revolution, our lives and make it better, right? Anxiety went up, depression went up, suicide, everything went up, right? What we're not realizing is the knock-on effect of what else will happen because we are humans and we crave the intimacy and authenticity of other people. So that is something that AI will never give, ever give, right? So I can't even tell you what the results of that will be, but I can tell, hand on my heart, tell you that there will be a knock-on effect, that eventually people will say, I'm just done with this. I actually just want to speak to somebody.
Yeah. And I think honestly, I think we're seeing that pattern in podcasts and how popular they've become. I recently had a company tell me, a tech company, that they were bidding for a job, and the CEO of the buyer actually said, send us a copy of your podcast. Let us get to know you, and then we'll get back to you. And he was like, wow. And the CEO said, yeah, he goes, all the stuff that I see from all of you guys is all so polished. He's like, it's just all bullshit. He's like, none of it's real. He's like, the only thing that's real is hearing you in a really casual conversation, talking about things and getting to understand who you are. Correct. Right. And that is something that AI can't do.
This is why these types of podcasts are so familiar, because the person listening, it feels like they're sitting with a bunch of friends discussing, and the authenticity oozes. Right. But if we were to use, we all know that we've all been in a room where buzzwords and, insincerity rules the day. You all look for the exit door. Like, how do I get out of here? Because this isn't like, or you are selling yourself. Like, I need to network. I need these people. So it's a different interaction going on in your mind, but it is not like your head saying yes, but your heart is saying, nah, I need to bounce.
If you think about 300,000 years of human evolution, for the most part, we learned things by sitting around a campfire and listening to conversations like this. Now, they weren't about cybersecurity, but what were they about? They were about the security of the village. They were telling stories of what happened in past times, and we learned lessons from those things. So I think you're really right. I think the authenticity that things like this can provide is really something that people are craving. And it's one of the reasons, even with our editors now, I tell them, I don't care about ums. I don't care about coughs. If the dog barks in the background, let the dog bark in the background. That makes it seem, I had this happen with a podcaster that I did some work with about a year ago. And she had just had a baby, and the baby was you could just hear in the background, like the nanny was trying. And finally, she's just like, we're going to have to shut it off, and I'm going to have to go get the baby. And I'm like, don't, just go get the baby. And she got everybody on social media was like, this is amazing because I can so relate to this because I have a baby. Yeah, it really does. And she thought it was so unprofessional. And on the flip side,
do you remember that guy with the little kid walking in like this? Like that still lives rent free in here, because what that guy did was normalize working from home, and and that was before the pandemic. What working from home looked like, that we were supposed to act like. I don't know where that started, but we were supposed to act like we weren't human. We didn't have a family. We didn't have small children, as if we all don't know what that's like. Right. Yeah, so for him to say, hey, listen, by the way, don't get me wrong, but this kid walking in and him and the mum dragging her away. Yeah, legendary. Not the action, but the way everyone reacted to that is what I'm trying to say to you, is that everyone reacted so positively because we were like, yeah, we've all been there.
It's exactly what we want to say. Listen, this has been a great conversation. I'm so glad that we connected today. Tell people a little bit about how would they find out more about you and the work that you do, because I think people, we got to think about this like the haircut, folks. Like we don't know. Your CTO doesn't know what they don't know. And they're not, their full-time job as a CTO or even a CIO is not thinking about this all day long.
Right. My first advice, because, I'm trying to live my life authentically myself. So it's very difficult for me to shill right now. But the only advice I would say is, if you are getting your system audited by the same company year after year, at the very least, change that. Okay. At the very least, change who's, by the way, audit your company, but in security, but at least change that every once in a while. If you're still getting tick boxes, do that. If you are and also audit the software you use. Technology changes, and that's, so do that as well. If you wanted to talk to me, the best way is to get me on LinkedIn under Dez Rock. Our website is SIEMonster, SIEMonster.com. And we can definitely help and advise. And I'd be happy to do that if somebody wanted to have a chat about their organization and where they're at. Even just for the advice, that'd be great. But sure. LinkedIn is probably the best. I was going to say Twitter, but Twitter is on its last legs too.
So Twitter is sort of struggling too. So it's this is what happens when you bring when you take something that was somewhat decentralized and there was a little piece that was centralized, and you try to take it to that next level. I could get into that whole conversation too, but I guess we'll leave that for another time.
My first post on Blue Sky, which was yesterday, by the way, said, "Cannot wait to sell my company for billions so I can open up the exact same company, but this time decentralized."
Well, you'll probably get private equity interest on that right out of the gate, right?
Because that's exactly what Jack's done, right?
It's exactly what Jack has done. Exactly. That's really interesting. Dez, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us on another edition of the Convergence. Make sure you like and subscribe. Okay, as I said, I turned the recorder off at the most inopportune time. I thought we were done, Dez. And then we went down the rabbit hole for another 45 minutes talking about the future of AI and singularity and what's on the horizon. I'm going to bring Dez back because we weren't able to capture that truly philosophical, in-depth conversation. And I'm going to bring her back so that she and I can recreate that and talk about it again. But keep tuning in. Next week, I have Gary Lee from Optimum College. Fascinating story. I've been following Gary on TikTok. He's been following me. We started having some chat conversations that spiraled into me saying, let's just turn on the camera and do this thing, Gary. Interesting theory of everything he believes he has discovered, and he is now teaching through Optimum College. There's a lot of fascinating stuff with this conversation, and I'm excited to get to know Gary more. I'm excited to bring him back as we develop this show even more over the coming months. Great, fascinating data to talk about new ways of educating, new ways of thinking and learning. Gary Lee, here we go.
Thanks for listening to The Convergence. If you want more information about the topics you've heard here today, reach out to us at theconvergencepodcast.com.